Hello and welcome to another episode of It Came From the Page. And today, we're doing something I haven't done publicly, at least for a while, which is a wrap-up video and going over all the books that I read in the month of May. And I know it's May 31st right now as I record this, but there's only one book that I will be finishing before the end of the month, and I will be talking about it at the end of this video, because I've mostly read it all, so I'll just mention it, but, you know, it doesn't matter. I want to do it today. Normally, I skip doing these because I do vlogs where I kind of just go through all of the books anyways, so, like, if you're a person who watches the vlogs, you don't really care about the wrap-up, you'd be like, whatever, man, I know what you read. But this month, I didn't really do any vlogs. It was just me doing chill things. And it was an interesting month. I think it was probably one of the more varied reading months I've had in a while, as you can see, because one of my main goals this month was to catch up on arcs from NetGalley. So at the start of this month, I was incredibly behind on NetGalley arcs. Like, we're talking, like, I think I had, if you factor in the two new ones that I literally got this month, I was like 17 books in the whole for NetGalley, and a lot of those has already been published, and what I did is I focused on getting through and reading as many of those as I could in the month. And I did really good. I only have 5 books left on my NetGalley arcs, and all of those are books that are coming out in the future. So I am not behind at all. I am completely caught up. And one of those arcs, the 5th one, is one that I literally just got today. So it's really, well, I think it was a few days ago, but regardless, it was very recently. So this is a big achievement in that regard. And I was also participating in Zombiethon, which was Kat from Kat's Novel Adventures Zombie Readathon. And what was fun is some of my arcs actually fit into that prompt already. So let us get into it. Starting off, there are a few rollovers from old school April, the greatest reading event of all time, created by Christy from Slime and Slashers. But there are 2 books that I didn't get to during old school April, and then I didn't finish them for like another 5 days. I finished half in April, and then I didn't read anything for the first start of May because I was playing a lot of video games. Playing the video games. I was playing Rogue Trader, which was a Warhammer video game, and it was very fun. I liked it a lot, but yeah, I wasn't doing a lot of reading the first week of May, and it was also like storming, and it was just like miserable weather, so my brain was like, bleh. Anyways, the 2 books that I finished that were holdovers were Alien by Alan Dean Foster, the original movie novelization for Alien. I had never actually read this before, which was a big surprise, considering 1, how much I love Alien, 2, how much I love novelization. So I finally got to the Alien novelization, and I'm very glad I did, because it rocked, dude. It was really good. I mean, like, you can, like, there are certain aspects of the book that, like, are clearly written in a way to obfuscate things in the film. Like, for example, they don't really go into full detail describing what the alien looks like, because they wanted to keep that a secret, and this came out before the movie, so they didn't want Alan Dean Foster to overly describe what the creature looked like before the movie came out. So you don't get many descriptive stuff about the alien, but the thing is, this book builds a whole world that this movie takes place in, and it really adds things to a lot of the character interactions and a lot of the characters in general. The setting, there's a lot more cat stuff in the book, which is very fun. Jonesy is super cool and cute in the book, and like there's a few like, I think there were like only like little snippets, paragraphs that are from Jonesy's perspective, and they're awesome. So I thought this was a great book, and like had this only been a book and never a movie, it would still have been a 5-star, because it was actually just like a great book. And I think that's one of the things about novelizations, is sometimes they're just great books, so it's like, they're not trash, bitch. But that is a discussion for another time. Next up, I finally read and finished the Godzilla comics. There is a Godzilla collection from Marvel, all of those original Godzilla Marvel comics. There are 70s books, and they were very, very fun, but they were very dated. There are some things that you read and you're like, oh, that's a thing. That's a choice you made in the 70s, and that does not work today, and you shouldn't have done that, Mr. Man. But other than that, like, other than, like, a few isolated little areas, it was mostly just very kind of fun, silly, campy, giant monster funness. So I had read a few of the comics before, but I've never actually sat down and read the whole thing, and it was really fun. It was very much like a good, watching a Saturday morning cartoon with Godzilla, and it just was a lot of fun, and a lot of the characters it chose to highlight from Marvel Comics was really fun. I feel like back in the day they just took a lot of crossovers a little bit less seriously, and I just think that makes a better book overall, because crossovers can get kind of meh. It's like, you know, there was a Godzilla versus Justice League comic, and like I haven't read it yet, but like it seems to be in a much more serious style, and I'm like, there's superheroes and he's a giant lizard. I don't need serious stuff from the American perspective when crossing over with a comic book. Like, you read it to have like a fun, silly, campy comic book time. But maybe that book is like that. I haven't read it yet. But regardless, I'm glad I finally got to that. Finally starting off on the zombie side of things, I read Creed, The Ashes of Cadia by Jude Reed. This is a Warhammer book, and it is very much kind of like, it's not 100% a sequel to The Fall of Cadia, which is a book that I read last month, but it is about the events that happen in that book. The events that happen in that book are like well known and like were covered in other material and stuff like that. So like you could just read this on its own, and basically the idea is that there was this planet called Cadia, which was the last bastion before a giant hole in the universe where demons poured out. The easiest way to describe it. And they were the planet that was to defend the realms of man from the encroaching forces of chaos. They didn't do well. It didn't work out well for them. The planet did explode. And this is a book about one of the people who is the daughter of the person who lost Cadia. And it's her going back to this shard of the planet that still exists and going and trying to find a secret hidden in a bunker that her father left for her. And it's her going back to this dead planet, and it is very much infested with zombies and demons and all kinds of wild things. And I thought this was a great book. Really well done characters, really cool characterization. The demon stuff was so much fun in this. And yeah, lots of zombie goodness. Lots of zombie goodness. And characters had more... There's a lot of characters that you think are more going to just be archetypes, but then they actually get kind of expanded in ways that you're like, oh, wow, that's really cool and interesting. And also there's like a non-binary character in here, which is very cool, which is something I see more in, books of this ilk than I do in, like, literary fiction or, like, straight-up horror fiction that I read. For whatever reason, like, it seems like tie-in books are way more, able to just, add in characters who are non-binary or who are trans, and just have them be characters in the book. Like, there are definitely, horror books written by trans authors, but you don't get a lot of ancillary characters who are non-binary or trans just existing as characters in a story that's not about that, or written by a member. And it was really nice to see a non-binary character in this, and this is not the only one in this one, so I was like, ha, that's cool. So Ashes of Cadia, really good, lots of great zombie stuff, and just a hoot. Next up is Red Harvest, Star Wars Red Harvest. And you're like, Star Wars? What does Star Wars have to do with anything that you're reading? And it's a zombie book, actually, because this is actually a prequel to Star Wars Death Troopers, which I read a few years back, and I had a hoot. I had blast with it. There's something, when it comes to zombies, I find, like, lately, I need a little bit more than just a normal zombie tale. I feel like everything that I can get from a good zombie tale has kind of already been done. But when you kind of cross over zombies with something else, and in this case it's Star Wars, there's an interesting thrill to it. I mean, it's very much this world that I grew up with as a kid and that in most every other aspect is a very like family friendly and oh, not that controversial. I mean, okay, it's the internet. There's a lot of people mad about Star Wars, but they don't go into controversial topics. And then all of a sudden you read a zombie tale, and it's like, damn, that stormtrooper just got his guts eaten, and just like wild zombie-related things in a universe that is normally not that. There's like there's like an interesting new element to the zombie tale that I do enjoy. This is a prequel, obviously, so this is set in like way back. Star Wars stuff, and it took a little bit to get into because I feel like the back of the book really misleads you as to where the main bulk of the story takes place, because the story makes it like the back of the book makes it sound like the zombies are like at a harvest planet. So like when the first 50 pages of the book before the zombies show up is all at this like weird Sith academy that is like interesting, but I'm like, what's the point of this? The zombie tale is taking place somewhere completely different. Why do I care about any of these characters? It's not what the story is going to be about. And it's like, nah, bitch, that's where the story is actually set. The zombies are on the Sith planet. You're like, oh, well, come on. Who wrote the back of the book? Why'd you do that? Anyways, once I finally got into that and kind of like got over the weird Star Warsiness of it all, because sometimes Star Wars names just make me go, ugh, dumb. But after that, I had a good time with it and went, wah. And yeah, had some really cool zombie elements. And also, like, there was one of the Jedi who, like, was definitely just written to be Liam Neeson's character from Taken. Like, he literally says Taken lines, and you're like, why? And, like, once you get to that level of, like, oh, we're just having fun goofiness with it, I really liked Star Wars Red Harvest. And then I read Halo: The Flood by William C. Dietz. This is the novelization of the first Halo game. I listened to this because, again, Zombie-thon, and The Flood is basically the zombies in the Halo universe. I wasn't sure what this was going to be, but this really is a novelization of the first Halo game, which is really interesting. I liked this book, but I didn't love this book because, like, I feel like near the end of this book, you really kind of get bogged down in descriptions of, like, here's fight, he throw a grenade, he shoot alien, and you're like, okay, like, I get it. Usually books like this that kind of go, like, yada, 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 and only show the most pertinent battle scenes in a story. Like I compare this to Fire Warrior by Simon Spurrier, which is the another novelization of a video game, of a first-person shooter, and like it truncates but also tells you things that happen. Like it's like, oh, many after like 2 hours of trucking through the mud, he finally ended up at his destination, and in the video game you play through that and you shoot a bunch of people, blah blah blah, have gunfights and stuff, but like it's not very important to the story. And like it's the same here, where it's like you should have just kind of truncated some of this stuff because you get a lot of fat, and certain characters don't have their same impact as they do in the game. So like say the hunters, you come across the hunters in the game, it's like, oh whoa, it's gonna be like a crazy fight, but the thing is they show up like 3 times in the book, and they show up multiple times in the video game as well, but they show up so many times in the book that like by the final time they show up, they're like, you're not, there's no suspense there anymore. It's just, oh yeah, he leaps the things, boom, boom, boom. But I liked all of the other character bits in this, when this was not being just a straight up retelling of the video game. It was actually pretty good and had a lot of really interesting characterization in its human cast, and that's something you don't get from the video game. So like the things it adds are quite cool and good. But the problem is everything else is kind of meh. Because there's only so many times you can read a fight scene before it's boring. This one is like it's written in a lot more of a military style as well, which is not something I'm used to, and it's not something I normally like. Although in one of the books coming up, it is actually a strength. But most of the time, I read military-ish sci-fi, but like it's not super military written like a military book. It's like written like a sci-fi book, and like the military tactics are kind of like yada yada yada. It's more on like what's the human impact of war, which is the interesting parts of war. Like I don't really care. It's like you gotta get a sit rep on the base and do the humpla jomplas. Oh, where's my hinkla drinklas and do the clonkalampas? And it's like I don't care about that. Although, like, I guess I just described, like, what if war, but Dr. Seuss. Next up, I'm gonna only talk about this one briefly. This is the only, like, pure normal zombie book I read this month, and it was Dead City by Joe McKinney. They really should, when you pick up a book, say, like, big letters on the front of the book, like, written by a cop, so you know not to read it, because this sucked. And of course it did, because it was written by a cop. It's just like a really boring, generic zombie tale. And, like, if anything, it does specify all of the problem with policing. Like, when you read it, you're like, yeah, bitch, this is why y'all get eaten by zombies, because you suck. Now we're on to the arcs. The arcs! So this is a fun little arc that I read that is like a comic book arc called Deja Ross Speaks to Freaks. Now this is drawn and written by Lisa Nafsinger, and I'm like, I know her, but like we're not like friends. Like we used to like hang out in the same circles, so like I don't know if I have to like preface that, but like she's great. I love her artwork. She's got all kinds of great giant monster stuff. When I was big in the Godzilla fandom, we like had like mutuals and we like talked occasionally, but like I don't know if we consider ourselves friends, but I figured if you're gonna be reviewing a book, you should at least notify people that you know the person. But I got this arc, and this is just like a really sweet book about this family who's going on a road trip, and one of the girls is really into cryptids. So what she does is she ends up finding a bunch of cryptids and ends up like creating a relationship with them, and kind of goes through and like interviews cryptids for her website and her, I think it like, no, it's not a website, it's like for a film project that she's making. And it's really cute. It's got really great characters. All of the cryptids are very fun and interesting and unique. And like she is like friends with like a chupacabra that's kind of like showing her around. And like if you have kids who are into monsters, like definitely this is a book that would definitely be one that you should check out, because it's a very sweet tale and has a lot of great imagery and monsters, and I really loved it. So it has a great message as well, so definitely high recommend for this little cute little cryptid comic book, graphic novel. On the complete opposite spectrum, I read Scott Snyder's newest comic series as an arc as well, which is Dark Spaces Dungeon. And oh my lord, Jesus Christ. Oh, Jesus. That book is dark, man. And I don't mean like the Liam Neeson movie. I mean like, man, it be dark. I mean, it's called Dark Spaces Dungeon, so like, yeah, it's gonna be dark. But like, it's like this, it's like kind of like, it's like a thriller, but like it's so far into horror. What happens here is that like it's more like Seven, I would say, like if you're gonna compare it to like anything. So it's not like a conventional thriller. It's like one of those like there is a very serious effed up crimes happening and this person is trying to solve them. But like this idea is like you get kidnapped by this guy and he puts you in this dungeon, and the dungeon is like this blank. It's like this room that is like, it's like a cube, and it has all of these like bricks in them that you can kind of push and like they like extend. And basically what he does is he like twists people in like very uncomfortable ways and like puts an IV tube to it, and they live as he like slowly like breaks their bones and stuff. And like if you're at all claustrophobic, you will be like, jabombs, I don't want to ever sleep again. I want to only be out where the sun is, because this is scary. I thought this was incredibly effective, and it gave me the heebie-jeebies. I don't really get the heebie-jeebies much. I'm not a heebie-jeebies fellow. I feel like I'm mostly immune to most horror, just because that's like overexposure. But this got to me. I was like, damn. And I thought this was a really interesting story as well, because like the main character was trying to hunt it down. He was trapped in one of these dungeons and he escaped. And it's like, did he ever really escape? Did he ever really escape? Deep thoughts for a deep book. Next up, another one of the arcs. This is The Darkness Over Arkham. So this is an Arkham Horror Investigators game book. So this is a game book in the style of old, like, fighting fantasy and that kind of ilk. If you've never played one of these, it's basically like a choose-your-own-adventure book, but you have stats. So you have to like roll dice and kind of like create a character and like do some investigation and stuff like that. I've never actually played one of these. I, for years, owned these. but I was like, I don't want to do math. So like I never did them. Which is dumb. Because like for this, I'm like, oh, I'm going to actually play these. Because I never played them as a kid, even though I owned a bunch of fighting fantasy books. So like I better actually play this and like roll the dice and everything like that. And I spent a day with like my journal. I had like a journal and like I was like deciphering clues and stuff like that, and I had a great time. It was awesome. It was so much fun. And I played through it multiple times with different characters that were in there just to see the different outcomes. And I only had to cheese a little bit to get to the endings that I wanted. So I had a really fun time with this. And yeah, it was just a complete surprise because I just didn't know what to think with like a fighting fantasy book. And it's interesting trying to review that because it's also like a game, but it's in a book. And regardless, I had a great time with it and I thought it was really fun. So if you're into those, definitely would recommend this. And even if you aren't into these, you should definitely try them out because they're actually way more fun than I ever thought they would be. So, who would I expect? Next up is Space Bullet, Volume 1, One Gamble at a Time. And yes, most of these will be arcs. I will let you know when they're not an arc as we go through. But this is a comic series written by Daniel Warren Johnson. And what's interesting about this comic is it is very much it feels a lot like, say, like Firefly-esque, where it's like a group of people who have like questionable morals and dark pasts, trying to get over their their own issues and the ideas of found family and things like that in the space setting. And this has really good artwork, and the characters are really interesting, and the world it's set in is pretty compelling. I don't think this is going to reinvent anything. Like, I don't think anyone would read that and be like, that's the most original work I ever read, man. But you'll have a great time. Like, if you like things like Firefly and stories where it's like a smaller cast on a spaceship going on various adventures, this is a good comic for that. And it gets to some dark and very interesting places because it goes places that a lot of stories of this ilk normally don't go, which is to try to actually discover what it means to be a person who has done legitimately horrible things, like war crime level things, and how they interact with the world after they were a part of that. And that is a level of talking about military service that like you almost always have to go to sci-fi or fantasy to do, because it gets real touchy if you talk about it in the real world, but it really happens to real people. So it's an interesting thing to dissect, and when it's not talking about very serious things, it's also a very fun book. Isn't that right, Mr. Lou? Next up, this is another zombie tale. This is Malphus, Necromancer Unchained. So this is not technically a pure zombie tale, but Malphus, who is a necromancer, does raise quite a bit of the zombies and the undead. So this is grimdark fantasy, I would say, where like it's set in a world that is very like kind of corrupt. There's not a lot of heroes. So you kind of have to depend on, the goodness of scoundrels to survive in the world. And it's really interesting. I like this book because our main character, Malphus, is somebody who has like a lot of power and does a lot of like strong things in this. But he starts out the book where he's like captured by this inquisitor who has him in this like these cuffs that don't allow him to do magic and kind of like interfere with his like brain processes, and like he can't focus on things to do magic anymore because of these magical cuffs. And it's him getting like dragged through the dirt, and it's like you really get to see this character at his lowest, and then he slowly regains his power and regains his own ability to exist in ways that are very interesting. And it's not one-to-one with, like, he's not a terrible person just because he's a necromancer, but he has bad things in his past that he's trying to get over, and it's just interesting. The world remind me a lot of like Warhammer-esque in that like there's like inquisitors who are absolute shitbags. It's not like that's only a Warhammer thing because like inquisitors existed and did horrible things because they're inquisitors, but like the way in which the inquisitor was written like reminded me a lot of like a Warhammer thing, and that's who was imprisoning him at first. And like the story is that like the Inquisitor is trying to capture him and take him to a trial where they basically torture him to death until he confesses, and then they kill him. It's, inquisitors. It'd be inquisitors be inquisiting. But on the way to this trial, they end up locked in this battle because they end up going to this town, and this town is surrounded by these like kind of hyena looking dogmen who I almost always like every time they appeared in the story. They're gnolls, I think they're called. But every time they appeared in the story, I just imagined the hyena from Batman Beyond, like the hyena dude, and I'm like, whoa, it's medieval hyena dude. Whoa, I love you, hyena dudes. And they've like surrounded this fort, and like there's like only a few humans left, and they're trying to hold out day after day, and they're really desperate for any help that is possible, so they have to basically overthrow the Inquisitor, release the Necromancer, and get the Necromancer to help them raise the dead to fight off this giant incoming horde of hyena dudes. And the action is really good. It understands the horrors of war, that war is bad, and you don't want to do it. I know it sounds like that should be obvious, but it's in literature, it's not always true. It's why I don't like men's adventure, because men's adventures are like, whoa, escape me, let's kill everyone. And like, I don't like, but I do like action and things of that ilk. So like, I did enjoy this quite a bit. Good action, good characters, good writing, and an interesting magic system that doesn't go overboard. Another arc. That time I got drunk and saved a demon. This is a fantasy romance, and I love this book. This book is so good. It had like a really good plot. Like, it is a fantasy romance where like the fantasy romance is obviously the center of the story, but they fall in love as they are doing a quest, and the quest is really interesting. It's like basically there is this woman who like kind of just like she's like a baker. She just wanted to live like get drunk and live her life normally. And there are these heroes that have to like go out and fight the demons, the evil demons, every like few years. And there's like a big festival where like they get crowned and they get sent out to like fight the demon hordes. Well, she is drunkenly walking home from that revelry, and then she finds herself in the middle of a fight with an actual demon. And it turns out the demon's not actually the bad guys. It's like the quote unquote goddess who is like protecting from the demons is actually a lich who has all of these like phylacteries, which are like parts of the lich's power, and they drive demons insane to make them look like they're evil, bad demons, but they're actually just like normal people. Like, some of them are jerks, some of them are nice. They're just demons that be demons. And it's her and this demon that has kind of like fallen in love with her, and they are going through and destroying the phylacteries and going to all the towns and all these different ways that this fantasy world deals with demons. And like, it's got some like really cool like story behind the romance, and the romance like kind of gets going. The saucy bits are there, and the saucy bits are great, really solid saucy bits. It's very funny. I mean, like, it's written like a little bit, like there's a little bit modern touches in some of the writing here. Like, don't expect like the thous schwamplas. It's like, it's not the thous fantasy. It's more like, there's like a modern. Some of the vernacular is like a little bit more modern than you would expect in a fantasy universe, but it didn't bother me. I was having so much fun with it. And there was like so many good characters in this, and I just really like this. So I actually need to read more of the books from this series, because I think the second one is That Time I Got Drunk and Accidentally Put a Love Potion on a Werewolf, which I want to read because I really like the werewolf character in this book, because the werewolf is in this, and he's a cool werewolf. So, I'm interested to read more. This was just a delightful surprise. Next up in this, in one of 3 books that I have that are dwarfs, fantasy dwarfs, on boats. Who would have thought that was a thing that happened in fantasy a lot? But apparently dwarfs are boating now. It's what they do. Anyways, this is Pinquickle's Folly, which is an R.A. Salvatore book. This is all set on the high seas. And it took me a while. So this is apparently part of R.A. Salvatore's original fantasy universe. I have not read any of those. So this book does a good job in setting up the world and setting up all the characters. But just, it's one of those books that, like, it's going to take you a little bit to get into the universe and to fully understand how everything is working. But once you get a grasp of everything, it's really good and really fun, and a good high fantasy book. It just takes a little bit of time to, to get into how this world works. But when we get into it, I really, really did end up enjoying it. I thought it was really good. I'm really kind of amazed that R.A. Salvatore has still got it. I mean, he was writing like classic D&D books. All the Drizzt Do'Urden books, like classic D&D, are all written by him. So it is really kind of amazing that he's got his own fantasy universe stuff that he does. And I never read any of those, and I'm so impressed that he still got it, because like the characters are really good in here. There are some disabled characters, and they interact with like very normally, and they incorporate them really well. I loved this high seas adventure kind of story that I've never really read that type of stuff before. So it does everything I love about fantasy, which is mainly putting disparate people together and learning to come together despite your differences, and really highlights the importance of diversity both in life and, of course, like just in reading in general. So that's what I like most about fantasy books, and that's here aplenty. And there's like some awesome ship-to-ship combat and some really cool characters. So yeah, definitely another one I would recommend. The next one, which is I can't decide if this is my favorite book of the month or another book is. It's up there. But this is the Archnaut's Oath, which is a Warhammer Age of Sigmar book. Now, I've never really read any book set in this specific universe. I know a little bit about it just because I know Warhammer 40,000, and there's like certain elements like chaos stuff that like blend between the two. But other than the fact that some of the demons are the same, I didn't know much about going into this. And I loved this book. This was so good. This is another book with like dwarf pirates, but like they're actually in the air. So this is all like they're on like an airship, and then they got like this giant like blimp that's like taking them around, and they're like flying in the air. And like this was so good. Like this was irrationally good. Like it is. There's so many great characters. Like this main character is called Drecky Flint, and like he's on this adventure, and he's like in over his head, and it's so fun. He's such a good character, and such a fun world and a style in this book, and it was just like a fun adventure story that was done to like the best of the best abilities. Everything I want from like an adventure story was done perfectly here. So many good characters, such a good fun story. And yeah, I'm gonna read way more of Age of Sigmar books, because if they're even close to this amount of quality, they're gonna be great. The main plot of this is basically Drecky Flint is forced to take his crew to find an ancient artifact, which when it gets installed into a city, will offer protection from the demons. And it's basically like going off and going into these old ancient dwarven ruins to take back something that belongs to the humans, and they can reincorporate that and protect their city once again from all of the mean old demi's. And it's just a really fun adventure story, and a lot of great characters, and I loved it. Next is The Runes of Engagement by Tobias S. Bucknell and Dave Kletcha. Now, this book was something I didn't know if I would like. So this is the book I was talking about that's really written in a very like modern military style, in that like the people who are in the military, they talk like a military people. They have like conversations that are very much recognizable from a military aspect. Even if you don't know everything that they're saying, you kind of get to understand that it's very military, written in a very military style. Like, what's the fronts and all this stuff, and like recon teams and like squads and like very like point by point stuff. And what's interesting is that it really worked well in this book, because it's the dichotomy between modern military and a fantasy universe. Because like the idea is portals have opened up around the world, and a bunch of fantasy creatures like came out and like destroyed everything. And the idea is the U.S. government and all the governments of the world pushed back and pushed the fantasy hordes back to their own universe, but then they went over and they established a base in this fantasy universe to kind of protect from any more incursions into ours. And it's the dichotomy of like a modern military group having to interact with characters who are very much from like a D&D style world. And they talk a lot about fantasy in general, fantasy tropes, and there is quite a bit of pop culture references in this from the perspective of the humans, but like it somehow works. It just feels more like natural. Like the dialogue is written very naturally, so it doesn't really interfere with your enjoyment. You're kind of like, yeah, somebody would like use this kind of vernacular to describe the fantasy universe they're in. It actually makes sense. And then as the book goes on, the fantasy universe becomes its own thing and is a little bit less a direct reflection of the ones that you know. And the more that the team has to go and interact with this universe, because they kind of get cut off and they have to find a way home. So they have to team up and help this elf regain her kingdom so that she can help them get back home and be safe and be back on planet Earth again. So it's really, really interesting, and it really has a unique feel to it because there's like kind of a crossover between two very different styles, and it really worked. And I really liked the characters, and it was a pretty great story overall. And then, so there was a series of books I read because I had the final book in this zombie series as my arc, which is City of the Undead. But Age of the Undead and Island of the Undead, which were the two books before that, I had not read, and I actually found on Everand, so I decided to read the other two books in the series before getting to the final one. So I'm going to talk about all these books together. They really are kind of the very similar styles. So this is a zombie tale in a fantasy universe, and it's very much like this land has been taken over by zombies and this disparate group of people. There's like a witch hunter, there is like a knight, there's like a thief, there's an orc, there's a dwarf, there's like all these disparate elements who like form a normal kind of like a fantasy party like in a D&D system, but it's them fighting against the undead and fighting in a zombie universe. And the characters are so good in this, and I'm like, damn, I love all the characters, which is very bad when you love characters in a zombie tale, especially in a long-running zombie series, because believe me, there's nothing more that people who write zombie tales like more than completely breaking your heart by writing the most horrific death for a character you love. And it's very sad, and it does happen in these books, and I got sad. But this is great because it's like the story is basically like all of these necromancers who basically are forced into exile because of a very restrictive, evil like church system that like demonizes all of them. So in essence, the church and the witch hunters and the Inquisition create this problem. So one of the things I really liked about this book is that it understands the societal issues that lead to one of these events. And it's not just necromancer bad. It's like necromancer bad and evil because necromancer had no more choice. Had no choice. Had to be this. And it really kind of tries to dissect like a lot of the internal politics of this world, which reflect on our own world, and like talk about like how a lot of times we create our own enemies and how nothing really happens in a vacuum, which is very cool. But these necromancers, they all get together and they raise hordes of the undead that basically take out 90% of living creatures on this fantasy continent. And it's all these people trying to find safe spaces, try to protect people, try to slowly become better people, because like the witch hunter slowly has to let go of some of her prejudices against magic, learn that a lot of things that she did were quite wrong and evil, and also like she has to learn how to deal with the idea that she actually has some magical abilities herself. So like the characters really grow and change, and also like especially in the third book, there's a little bit of a backsliding, and they deal even with like, oh, you've changed, but there's a way to offset some of your change to go back to the way you were, and it's like, no, don't do that, even though it's really easy to fall back into old bad habits. So the characters are just so rich in this series of books that I had a great time with it. Now, I guess I should mention that these are technically board game tie-ins, I guess. Like, I guess this is something that some people go like, oh, I cannot believe it. I'm like, I don't care. I've never played Zombicide. I don't know anything about Zombicide. I'm here talking about books that I liked. And I don't care if they were like based off of a board game. These are just great books that have really good characters and really kind of get into the nitty grittiness of an interesting fantasy universe. The action is really, really solid in all of these books. The second book has one of the best dragon fights I think I've ever read in fiction. So yeah, I really, really love these books. This is a trilogy of books by C.L. Warner. Again, these have like a lot of Warhammer-esque fantasy. This one is even more prevalent than Malthus because C.L. Warner actually wrote a bunch of Warhammer fantasy books. So like I know that that's kind of the world that this is like a little bit of some of the stuff that he kind of takes from like Warhammer fantasy, but it's not, Warhammer fantasy took from everything as well. So I don't care where you get your ideas from. I care how you implement your ideas. And I think the ideas are implemented extremely well. So if you're all into zombies and you're all into fantasy and you just want to read a series of really fun books, really recommend the Undead books by C.L. Warner. Almost at the end. Next up is a comic book called We Called Them Giants. This is another arc. This is a very interesting, beautifully illustrated comic book where there is this girl who wakes up and almost everyone on Earth has disappeared. It's like a post-apocalypse novel, but we never really know what happened to all these people. They're just gone, and it's her teaming up with some people that she used to go to class with, and they are just kind of trying to live in this post-apocalyptic world, and then one day, giants show up. And there is this giant guy who's like this glowing wet red dude. You never really learn who he is, why he is, or what he is, but there's a red one and a green one. And it's basically just a tale of like what it's like trying to live in this world that you don't understand, you don't know anything about, and it seems like the red giant is actually kind of nice and kind of wants to be friends with them and kind of talk about them, but she doesn't really trust it. And like it's really, really interesting because you don't ever know anything really about this world. You just kind of get a single perspective on this story, and you don't know anything that she doesn't know, and she doesn't know why any of this happened. And it's just like this really interesting, beautiful book with some great artwork and some interesting story elements that you really cannot explain anything that happens. So it's kind of about the mystery of the world, and you don't really need to be super concerned with how a thing happened. You have to deal with the aftermath. And I really liked it. I thought it was a really cool and interesting tale. Song of Carcosa, a Arkham Horror novel. Again, Arkham Horror is a board game. It's not a big deal to me. This is by Josh Reynolds, who, again, he wrote a bunch of Warhammer stuff as well. And I loved this book. I thought this was so interesting. This is very much like a book set in an H.P. Lovecraft-esque world, but it's great because it's way better than H.P. Lovecraft because it doesn't have all the terrible, shitty things that H.P. Lovecraft books have. And what's cool about this book is that it's like a multicultural tale, and there's also there's non-binary characters in this, and it's like exploring a kind of like a Cthulhu-esque style of old gods and things like that, but done from a perspective of a non-shitty person. So that's cool. I love that. And I think taking the best things out of someone like H.P. Lovecraft's work and just making better material out of it is great. This book actually is more based off of The King in Yellow, which is not an H.P. Lovecraft story, but is a similar cosmic horror thing. And this is this book is about this girl who is having these dreams of this mythical city called Carcosa. And it's her trying to figure out why she's having these dreams, why she's disconnecting dreams from reality, and she and her friend go to Venice to try and solve this problem. And this is this big intrigue between all these different power players in Venice who are all kind of worshiping different old gods and want to see different gods come to the fruition and come back to the world. And it's trying to manipulate certain elements against each other in order to make sure that the world doesn't get swallowed by the apocalyptic nothingness. And it's just a fun cosmic horror tale with a lot of moving parts. And it's set in I think it's set in early 30s or late 1920s, because it is all very much about the grasp of fascism on Italy at the time, as well as the fascists. The fascists play a big part in the story, and they're really kind of like talk about how World War II really made a good setting for a cosmic horror tale in pre-World War II. This isn't World War II, pre-World War II. Because when you're about to be taken over by fascism, it really doesn't seem like too much of a step to seek otherworldly help. Because like I find like in a lot of cosmic horror, you're like, why are you doing this? Why are you trying to bring back this weird old god? And it's like this one, it's like, yeah, we're about to be all killed by these racists and like these horrible fascist monsters. Why don't we ask a cosmic entity to help us and maybe help us see a better future? Even though, of course, it's a cosmic horror book, so it's like, obviously, you're not going to get a better future from these evil cosmic beings. But, like, at least it makes a little bit more sense than some books of this nature. And it's all really used really well, because it really kind of sets Venice up as a boiling pot of all these different factions, and it's just a really good cosmic horror tale, and I highly recommend it. Next up, my other book that might be my favorite book is The Wraithbone Phoenix. This is a Warhammer crime book, and I've never read any Warhammer crime books. This is just crime stories set in Warhammer 40,000. Apparently they all take place on a single planet, and it's all like these crime tales from this planet of Gargantua. And this was so good. This was so good. It was one of those books where it's like there is this Ratling and this Ogren, who are basically like in Warhammer 40,000. They're like the hobbits and ogres, basically, is the easiest way to describe it. And they are looked down upon by everyone else in the Imperium, because the Imperium of Man is a horrible place. And they basically will use these things that they call them abhumans, and they will use them in their wars, and they'll use them for like difficult construction work. But like they don't really respect them. They don't treat them well. They don't treat them like humans, basically. They literally call them abhumans. And it's them trying to navigate a world that it looks down upon them, and they are trying to finally get their big break. So these are two characters who, Claude and Bigot, who robbed the wrong people. Like they used to be military, they got out of the military, and they're now kind of like thieves, I guess is the best word for it, and they robbed the wrong place, so they got like a huge bounty on their head. So they have been like hiding in these like salvage yards for like months upon months, and eventually they find out there is this ship that has arrived that has this very ancient artifact hidden within it, and basically if they can get this artifact, they can make it so that they get away scot-free, and they can pay off their debts to this crime boss that they stole from. He is a crime boss, but he's also like in charge of the planet. He's like the governor or something like that. So like he's like a big high-to-do in society, but he's also very much involved in crime. But anyway, so they are trying to get to the ship to find this Wraithbone Phoenix to pay off all their debts and hopefully gain freedom and be able to go back to living their normal lives. But what happens is they have big bounties on their heads. So everyone is there's a whole bunch of people who are trying to get the bounties from their heads. And then in the process of trying to find out and track them down to get the bounties for them, they find out there's a whole bunch of people who are searching and trying to get the treasure as well. So it's like all these disparate elements who are like converging in one point, and like all these people have very different views. And what's really cool about this is that the action, amazing, such good action in this, but also the character work is so well done. Even characters who are like really minor, small characters are like done so well in this book that I just absolutely love them. Like you fall in love with them. Even like smaller characters have really cool, interesting arcs, and there's just so much. It's one of those books where like you can't help but love the characters in this book, even though they are a little bit scumbaggy, but they will still do what's right in the end. So they've got loose morals, but they still got some morals, and like it's just them trying to earn back the right to just exist in this horrible society and try to make the best that they can. And it's just really interesting, really good characters. The audiobook is so well done, and like there's a lot of like really interesting little elements to it. So yeah, I love this book. Next up, the only book I'm going to be showing you physically, I read one of the Horse Heresy Primarch novels, Angron, Slave of New Syria. This is basically kind of like, I read that huge series, the Horse Heresy series. This is a series of books that kind of tie into that, and they focus on a specific character in a specific set of time to kind of describe who they are and what they are like. And this is describing the World Eaters before they kind of went mad and before they all got the butcher's nails implanted in them. So basically Angron, who was their big mean deity, he was trapped on a planet after being separated from the emperor who created him. He was put on this planet, forced to be in these horrible gladiatorial pits, and eventually they implanted him with something called the butcher's nails, which puts a bunch of spikes in your head and pretty much makes it so that you're only able to feel any joy when you're doing horrible things. Like, it totally messes up your brain chemistry and basically turns you into like a raving madman, and to do anything and to achieve anything you have to like have so much sense of will, or else you'll just completely lose yourself in the butcher's nails and just destroy everything. And it's like the only way that you can feel any peace from the pain of the butcher's nails is by doing something horrible and causing bloodshed and kind of thing like that. So he has that, and he's set up to try and rule and try to look after this army of dudes who don't have that, and he looks down upon all of them. So they all want to be like their deity, and they all want to also get the butcher's nails so they can be fighters like him, but they don't really realize that they'll just completely lose themselves and become completely unhinged psychopaths if they do this. And it's like there's this entire book is basically about these two sides of the people in the World Eaters being like, what if we don't become horrible monsters like our Fayada? And it's just like trying to rebel against the place that this is all inevitably leading to. This one was very fun to read physically because there's this great point. So like one of the main characters gets implanted with the butcher's nails, and like it just completely cuts out when he loses control. And there's like a whole bunch of like pages that are basically like just red from all the blood from all the carnage, and it just like it hops back in the middle of a like a battle scene where he regains consciousness and regains sense of self. And I thought that was a really good way of just like describing a person completely lost to their manic impulses. Anyways, really good, really fun. Basically, if you're into the Horse Heresy, it's a cool book. It would be entertaining to read if you don't have the context, but I think it works better in the context of the series. And finally, last but certainly not least, I've been reading the second edition rulebook for Vampire the Masquerade. I'm actually going to be finishing this today. I have about 50 pages left, but it's mostly rules. I've got through all of the like world building stuff, and this is a blast. This is very much written for goth kids of the 90s, and obviously there are some things that don't really hold up today in terms of language and the way we talk about things, but for the most part it's a pretty great vampire tale with a lot of awesome artwork in it and a really interesting world. It seems to be setting up a really cool game system. So it's like a tabletop role-playing game like Dungeons & Dragons, but again, made for cool goth kids in the 90s. And I'm reading this for reasons. What reasons could they be? You'll find out maybe next month. But yeah, I love this book. It's great. It's a cool system. It's a lot more easy to run and easy to explain to others than something like Dungeons & Dragons. It seems like it's really built to just kind of have fun and get into the systems, as they are very simple, and it's more focused on roleplay than it is rolling dice, which is very cool. But yes, that is what I read in the month of May. What did you do in May? I hope it was good, and I hope you have a good day. Goodbye.